All right, are we on? We are on. Yes, Senators Mark Steffen, Senate District 34. Fellow senators, I strongly support SB 391 as a cleanup bill for the Emergency Management Act rework we did 3 years ago. What SB 391 does is it repositions public health to an advisory role, just like the World Health Organization, the CDC, and the NIH. They educate and recommend. They advise, they do not mandate. This bill stops no bureaucrat from doing anything they can't already do now, except force their will on individuals who did not elect them. SB 391 repositions teachers and administrators away from the role of reporting diseases and puts it clearly in the hands of school nurses, which is entirely appropriate. The threat of measles outbreak, yeah, it's there, it's ever present, and most likely always will be, for 3 reasons. Number one, there are unvaccinated people who made their own individual decisions. The measles vaccine is anything but 100% perfect. And number 3, think of the millions of unvaccinated illegal aliens pouring across our borders into every nook and cranny of this country. SB 391 does protect an employee from being fired for following a recommended quarantine. Makes sense. That's the way it should be. Masks, lockdowns, closures, ginned up inaccurate tests, no early treatments, a gene-altering medical procedure termed a vaccine. That's the legacy of public health today. SB 391, via an advisory role, brings humility and sincerity to a problematic, chronically ill government department. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And next we will have William Bill Mize. Could you come up to the microphone?
Good morning, committee. My name's William Mize. I'm from Overland Park, and I'm here to support SB 391. The bill essentially allows the health agencies to continue their role as advisory to do anything for health of the state, but they just don't get to mandate the rules. And the pandemic was a test for these agencies that we had. They had a role in closing virtually every part of society, the education, the schools, the businesses, churches, and how they do all that. We believe that they did not do a very good job. They told us that if you were vaxxed, you were more likely or not vaxxed, you were more likely to spread this disease. That was inaccurate. They said natural immunity was inferior to the immunity you got from the vaccine. That was false. They said if you'll stay 6 feet apart, that will stop the spread. Again, that was false. And they said don't use these drugs like ivermectin ahead of time. You wait until you get sick enough, until you got to be hospitalized, and then you go to the hospital, and they've got the magic drug that will take care of you. And by the way, they'll get a lot of money. They'll get thousands of dollars if you take that drug when you go to the hospital. I think that the evidence is that they have failed in their first attempt at this with an emergency. I don't think they deserve another chance. I think let the agencies educate us, let them do testing, let them try to convince us that what we need to do is what they're telling us to do. Don't give them the ultimate power to say you guys are going to do exactly what we say because we know the science. We know if they know the science, they may not practice it. Support SB 391. Thank you.
Thank you. And William, forgive me for if I shortened your name to Bill. I typically don't do that. And Debbie, welcome to the microphone, Debbie Mize.
Madam Chair, committee, thank you for letting us be here today. In just a few minutes, the KDHE and some other elected agencies will come up here to tell you that they will be unable to do their job should you pass SB 391.
Conspiracy lady.
Wait, what?
That's a lie. Their job is to educate, recommend, and suggest, not to mandate. But in 2020, public health departments and big business did not follow that. They mandated us, they forced us, and now we know, based a lot of their information on bad science as it has come to light. The intent of this bill is to simply guard our Constitution, not saddle the KDHE. It's your job to protect our constitutional republic. Please vote yes on SB 391. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Michelle Eagleman.
Madam Chair Gossage, Vice Chairman Erickson, thank you for letting me speak today. I have here a copy of the Constitution of the State of Kansas, and it reflects the U.S. Constitution in many ways, and I would like to read a portion of it that applies to this bill. Section 7 is about religious liberty, and it specifically states in the text, "Nor shall any control of or interference with the rights of conscience be permitted." There's nothing unclear about that, but during COVID, we saw with forced masking and vaccine mandates how ineffective this phrase was. Unelected county and state officials apparently did have control over an individual's conscience. On January 12, 2022, I stood outside the county courthouse in Douglas County with probably 30 other people to protest the second proposed mask mandates by our county health officer. There were over a dozen sheriff's officers lined up forcibly barring our way in, even those with written exemptions. It was like a dystopian novel. Was that moral? Yesterday it was implied that to be opposed to vaccination was immoral. If that is the case, what is morality? Obeying your conscience or obeying the powers that be? Our freedom as citizens is at stake. I don't think I'm overstating that our republic is at stake. The Constitution of Kansas and the U.S., for that matter, mean nothing if we don't stand behind the words. Totalitarianism pretends to be compassion, but it goes against liberty in all of its forms. There was nothing compassionate about my husband being told he had to get an experimental shot or be fired. There was nothing compassionate about my son being told unable to fulfill his obligations as an ROT student and train at Fort Knox his junior year if he didn't get an experimental shot. There was nothing compassionate about my daughter being unable to travel on an honor scholars trip she earned to Israel unless she got the experimental shot. One-size-fits-all healthcare is a contradiction in terms. There is no defending forced healthcare. SB 391 needs to pass this committee. Not in the special session, not last year. Oh, I'm sorry. The legislature hasn't stood in the breach to protect citizens from overreach in the name of public health. Not in the special session last year, not in the legislative session last year. This year is another opportunity. We need, sadly, to pass this constitutional right to health freedom act. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, and now can you tell me if we are able to hear any of our folks on WebEx? Next, I have Galen Perry. Galen, are you on with us? Dr. Perry? Can you tell me if Dr. Perry's on?
Can you hear me? I'm here.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Senators, once again for allowing me to speak. I think it's an important reminder that has already been spoken why we are talking about SB 391, reflecting again on the public health policies that were put in place. As a reminder, COVID had an infectious fatality rate equivalent to the influenza. That is fact. The CDC has actually downgraded all the deaths by 50% because of people dying with COVID rather than from COVID. Tony Fauci told Congress that the 6-foot social distancing recommendation was just a recommendation. There was no science. I have actually 150 articles showing that masks do not work, nor did they ever work. And yet we have citizens walking around with masks on. And as a pulmonologist, I know that lowers their oxygen levels and increases their carbon dioxide levels, which is harmful to their health. We talked about closing schools, lost learning. And I will mention to you that the American Academy of Pediatrics is actually changed the childhood developmental milestones. Children usually develop at the same rate, but that was changed in February 2022 because children did not learn to speak because they could not see people's faces. Children's Mercy Hospital opened a new mental health clinic expecting 3,000 children to show up in the first year. They had over 3,000 children in the first 2 months. We've created a mental health crisis. This amendments to this bill does not change the substance. We are still being protected against contagion, but all it does is change words like require, must, order, control, enforce, execute, empower to recommend, shall, further manage, or make policies. The substance of the bill continues to protect Kansas citizens against contagion, but it also protects the inalienable rights of our citizens. A bill should be able to support both. Lastly, the removal of section regarding the use of a sheriff to insist to execute and enforce any orders must be removed if nothing else has changed. Sheriffs have testified before your committee saying they will not participate in that behavior. I'm asking you that you pass this bill out of committee, pass it on the floor of the Senate, and I'm asking you to talk to your colleagues in the Public Health and Welfare Committee on the House side to please give these bills a hearing. Thank you so much for your support of this bill.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. Next, we have Debbie Dittmer. Debbie, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair and committee members, I'm Debbie Detmer, a retired nurse and a proponent of SB 391. In 2020, our governor and the Secretary of Health and Environment shut down Kansas, creating a cascade of problems. Families lost their jobs, their homes, their businesses. Domestic abuse was high, suicides increased, mental instabilities rose, and the unemployment rose, with a failure in that system with hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen due to fraud and the people not taken care of. And the economy plummeted. The 15 days led to months and the shutdowns and quarantines. This needs to change. In 2021, we begged you to come back into special session, and you did. And we will always be grateful that you guys gave us the religious exemptions against the government overreach. But you said you would do more. It has been 3 years. And the history does repeat itself. This can never happen again. The change in authority is a must. We must revoke the authority of the secretary to order individuals and to isolate or to quarantine and impose penalties of this violation. Please pass Senate Bill 391 out of committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. And next we have Connie. Connie, can you hear me? Connie Newcomb?
Me?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. The Department of Transportation cares about safety. If there are several deaths at the same intersection, studies are made to determine if it could be made safer. The Department of Transportation seeks to assume responsibility even when it may be a driver's fault. Now let's look at the Department of Public Health, including the CDC and its contingencies, such as our own KDHE. When there appears to be deaths from vaccines, does this department investigate? If 50% of SIDS occurs within 24 hours of vaccination, is this important? Should we change direction? Or should we just tell parents to put babies on their backs? Is correlation important to consider when causation seems to point in a certain direction? It sure is when there are traffic accidents. If there are an estimated excess 17 million deaths worldwide since the COVID vaccine came out, is this something we should look at? Should we put up signs? Should we make the intersection of public and public health safer? The historical pattern of this department is to stay in their armored car and keep a foot on the accelerator. Never look in the rearview mirror, never back up, never apologize, never hit the brakes, get out and sympathize with the victims. Only slow down long enough to make room for another financial contributor or for another lawmaker who supports the department's beliefs. Refueling happens at stations that are provided by the national agencies and corporations which keep pumping the people's money into this vehicle. The Department of Public Health assumes no responsibility for damages. Why not? Because they are fully insured through statutory law. No one ever successfully accuses the DOPH of vehicular homicide. The Department of Public Health has created its own driver's manual. Patients' rights, masking, vaccines, lockdowns, increased injuries, deaths, severely heightened mental health issues, loss of jobs, a damaged military, infertility, nothing is ever their fault. They keep on driving, refueling, and disregarding the distraught and anguished public as they pass glibly by. We can be glad that the Department of Transportation does not take its cues from the Department of Public Health. Please vote to support SB 391. You are voted into office to be a liaison between the government and the people. A yes vote would be an indication that you are willing to care about the people you represent who have been harmed by the excesses of the juggernaut of public health.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you.
Next, we go to Mike Perry.
Good morning. Thank you for the time to speak. I echo Senator Stephan and Dr. Galen Perry emphatically supporting this bill. You know, it was amazing during COVID. You know, we don't live in communist China, but it sure felt like it. You know, the stuff coming out of our government, the mandates, everything, it was unbelievable. We were just, my wife and I were in horror watching all this. And we must take the steps to protect each and every person, not some entity, some pharmaceutical company, whoever that wants this to be put through the way it was originally. We must protect the people's rights. No one should have the power to arbitrarily quarantine or impose penalties on anyone for their personal choices on health matters. And no one should ever be mandated to take any kind of unproven drug, vaccine, or anything else. It's just unconscionable that that happened. So I please ask you respectfully to support SB 391 so that we can get back to living in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And next we go to Melissa Campbell.
Good morning, committee. It's nice to visit with you all again. This is, I think, the third year in a row I've come to talk to you about something very similar to this. I'm just a citizen, and so I feel like a lot of times our voices don't get heard, but I appreciate you taking the time to hear us today. Specifically, when I'm digging into the 65-129B issue that's in this bill, I found a couple of things that I wanted to address. I do echo the sentiment and the words of a lot of the previous conferees, and I just wanted to share specifically something that I was really intrigued by and disappointed by was that it's already in statute that the sheriff can be ordered to come to my home, to a place that I live, and remove me or my minor child from my home to a place of quarantine if the KDHE secretary believes that I'm a health threat because I've refused testing, treatment, quarantine, or a vaccine. And so that feels like it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment about search and seizure. And so having that, it feels like a conflict to have that in statute right now. The other thing that I am concerned about is when we say that we don't all want to be forced to have a vaccine, sometimes people say no to that because of a scientific factor of it's what we call MTHFR, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, and it's a gene mutation that 1 out of 10 people have one component for, and 1 out of 3 have both components for. And what that does is it doesn't allow your body to detox in the same way that everybody else's bodies do. And when the toxins build up over time, their bodies tend to create autoimmune issues. And it's a real concern for the health of our public to be able to say no when they are have tested positively for the gene mutation. So those are just a couple of considerations. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on from there. But thank you for your support of 391, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Melissa. And then we have Julie Pennington.
Madam Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify in favor of Senate Bill 391. This act is desperately needed. My name is Julie Pennington, and I am a lifelong resident of Kansas, over a half a century now. I won't read my written testimony as you have that in front of you. I will add the following that is not included in my written testimony. Back in the day when these laws were written, I believe we could count on our appointed officials to use their powers judiciously. COVID showed us that we cannot. On the morning of June 27th, 2020, I woke up partially blind in my left eye. I was diagnosed with a torn and detached retina, and it was severe. Detached retinas must be repaired almost immediately, otherwise you risk losing your sight and possibly your eye. My surgeon was able to get me in to repair the detached retina, which in my case, like I said, was severe. However, he was not able to schedule my surgery until Tuesday, 3.5 days later, more than 3 days. The reason was because of COVID. In Kansas, surgery centers in certain communities, surgery centers were still very restricted, especially where my surgeon practiced. Even then, he couldn't get me scheduled for emergency surgery in Kansas. I thank God, and I thank the state of Missouri, that they were able to open carefully without putting anyone at risk, and I was able to have my surgery in Missouri, where my surgeon also worked. Again, I've already submitted my written testimony about the conduct of the Atchison County health nurse. I only want to add that the things she did were not done in any other county in Kansas that I'm aware of. Not even KU imposed the draconian measures that she tried to impose on our students when they returned. As I mentioned, the college already went above and beyond what was recommended for the returning students, and to have perfectly healthy students locked down. Okay, is my time up? Okay, I will cut it there. We asked for the reasons. She refused to give them, but we found out later that the reason had more to do with her trip to Hawaii, which she went on right afterwards.
Sorry to hear that, Julie. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Committee, we have about 5 minutes for questions, so that means a short question and a short answer before we move on to our opponents. Senator Hulscher.
Mine will be very, very short. My question is for Debbie Mize, and it's just a yes or a no. Are you affiliated with a business called Whispering Elm Farm that sells medicinal herbs and alternative products? And again, just a yes or a no. We'll be fast.
No. Not at this time. The farm has been dissolved. Thank you.
Okay.
They've moved away to Tennessee.
Committee, other questions? Seeing none, we'll move to the opponents. And we first have Ashley Goss with who is the Deputy Secretary of KDHE. Welcome, Ashley.
Good morning, committee. Thank you, Chairman Gossage and members of the committee. Ashley Goss, Deputy Secretary for KDHE. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony regarding Senate Bill 391. As you've previously heard, overall, the Senate Bill 391 would remove the limit or would remove or limit the authority of the Secretary of Health and Environment, as well as limit the authority of our local health officers to control the spread of infectious and contagious disease. Cases of infectious and contagious diseases would no longer be reportable to KDHE, which would mean the medical and public health community would have no insight as to if the disease cases were increasing or decreasing should this bill pass. It would also remove public health authority to isolate people with infectious or contagious diseases who refuse to keep themselves away from others while infectious diseases, while they are suffering from the disease, putting our most vulnerable at greater risk to and including death. Senate Bill 391 would leave our school districts that don't have access to school nurses to figure out how to control the spread of the illness in their buildings. In addition, this bill would place the entire responsibility on the local county health officer and local health department to identify sick individuals in each county, meaning every county would have to establish the infrastructure to receive lab reports from all over the state, but also other states that are managing Kansas residents, as well as the CDC. Our agency asked this committee to please recognize the work that public health is all-encompassing, arduous, and necessary for everyday life to continue. Public health ensures that hospitals are practicing good infection control, that children can play, learn, grow, and stay healthy, and that when one person gets sick with an old or new disease, it does not have to spread everywhere. Without these public health mitigation measures, the impact of infectious disease outbreaks will increase and have both a human and financial impact on individuals, families, healthcare system, and public health. We ask that the committee not pass this bill, as it would undo hundreds of years of public health work that has helped control the spread of infectious and contagious diseases in our state. We appreciate the opportunity to testify in opposition to this bill, and we urge you not to pass it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Heather Braun, Health Policy Advisor with KAC. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. Chair Gossage and members of the committee, I am Heather Braun, Health Policy Advisor with Kansas Action for Children. Like you heard from us yesterday, we also strongly oppose Senate Bill 391 because we're on the cusp of an outbreak of one of the most highly infectious diseases on earth, measles. Senate Bill 391 would remove the full power of time-tested tools like quarantines and restricts collaboration amongst our state and local health officials to stop these outbreaks. What is at stake? While some of the population is vaccinated against these diseases, some children are too young to receive standard immunizations. Outbreaks must be stopped quickly through infectious disease outbreak response tools before children become hospitalized, end up with lifelong consequences, or die from these diseases, as what happened to the daughter of children's author Roald Dahl in 1962. And I'm going to read from a letter he wrote in 1986 that's cited in my testimony. My eldest daughter caught measles when she was 7 years old. As the illness took its usual course, I can remember reading to her often in bed and not feeling particularly alarmed about it. Then one morning, when she was well on the road to recovery, I was sitting on her bed, showing her how to fashion little animals out of colored pipe cleaners. And when it came to her turn to make one herself, I noticed that her fingers and her mind were not working together and she couldn't do anything. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked her. "I feel all sleepy," she said. In an hour, she was unconscious. In 12 hours, she was dead. The measles had turned into a terrible thing called measles encephalitis, and there was nothing the doctors could do to save her. When he was writing this, that was 24 years ago in 1962. And this holds true today that he wrote back in 1986. But even now, if a child with measles happens to develop the same deadly reaction for measles as Olivia did, there would still be nothing for doctors to help her. Please oppose Senate Bill 391 for the sake of our youngest children. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Heather. Next, we have William Wilk, who is the Director of Government Affairs.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is William Wilk, Senior Director of Government Affairs for the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. The Kansas Chamber appreciates the opportunity to submit opponent testimony to Senate Bill 391, a bill related to the public health functions. The main portion of the bill I would like to focus on with my testimony is Section 8, amending KSA 65-129D to read as a public or private employer shall not discharge an employee solely because the employee or immediate family member of the employee is following an isolation or quarantine recommendation from a local health officer, or solely because of the such employee's vaccination status. In an action against the employer for a violation of this section, the court shall award a prevailing plaintiff the actual damages such person sustained, costs, and reasonable attorney fees. This, again, is an unnecessary change to statutes preventing employers from deciding what they believe is best for their employees. Employers do not need any additional burden of government regulation preventing them from working in tandem with their employees to ensure their safety and protection. For example, if an employee of a manufacturing company comes into work with the knowledge of being ill, putting the entire company at risk of catching the illness, creating a scenario where production could be shut down for a week or even multiple weeks in an already tight supply chain market. The Kansas Chamber believes in allowing our members to decide what they believe is best for the safety of their employees as individuals and as a united working group. In closing, this again is an unnecessary piece of legislation that places restrictions on Kansas businesses. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 391, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much, William. And next we have Randy Bowman, Executive Director, KALHD.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, I'm Randy Bowman. I'm the Executive Director for the Kansas Association of Local Health Departments, here to speak to you on behalf of our 100 health departments serving the 105 counties of Kansas. You have my written testimony, but I always choose not to read, as a few of you know from my past appearances in other committees. What I want to bring to light today is, wow, we're all frustrated with what we lived from 2020 to current with this thing. I think that's common for everyone. And did it change how we live our lives? Did it change some things in society? I don't think that's questionable. But for me, looking at this bill, I don't see how this makes any future response any better. 3 points I'll hit on that. Every democracy in the world and non-democracies use these same tools in response, masks, quarantines, etc. Every state government used them regardless of political party and power. So I think those are consistent. Do we need better solutions in the future? Perhaps we do. I do not see anything in this bill that guides us down that path or creates a framework to identify what improvements to the next public health response might be. I also see in the bill, and this is particular to Section 6, that in parts with removing the authorities of the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, the boards of county commissioners as health and local health departments, we would send reports to the Senate President and the Speaker of the House. What do they do? I don't find in the bill. Those are not people elected by us as the citizens. Those are people appointed and elected by you as a body. So I would suggest that a governor, an executive branch in every government or every state government, regardless of party, is better equipped to respond to a pandemic because the executive branch is there every day. Kansans value their part-time legislature. I don't see value in this bill of bringing the two leaders that are unelected to those roles. They are elected to other offices, of course, and having them get a report, and we don't know what they're going to do with it. They cannot act timely as a legislature. You're a part-time body. So I'd say, where is the venue? And I do not have the magic answer for you to have thoughtful, data-informed, and passionate-informed discussions about how we can improve the next time. Hopefully somebody else will have the answer to that question. I wanted to pose it for our consideration amongst all of us today. And with that, I will stand for questions at the appropriate time with the others.
Thank you, Randy. Committee, do we have questions for the opponents? Senator Holscher.
Yeah, probably for Ashley. Thank you. Okay, so it strikes me that a lot of this comes from COVID and the time of the pandemic. So can I ask you, do we currently have any requirements or mandates for COVID?
No, not at this time. COVID is no longer a reportable disease. There's no longer mandates. There's no mask mandates or any of that. There's no vaccine requirement mandates. And as I've stated before, we have no plan on requiring the COVID vaccine in any way, shape, or form. It's the same as we've done with flu. We have not required that either.
Okay, and then can you tell me if all schools have nurses that can handle this, if you all are cut out of the process?
All schools do not have nurses that can handle this. In rural Kansas, a lot of the school nurses would be the school secretary. And this was a heavy lift for them. And our local health departments were able to assist them during the pandemic. However, should we be cut out of this piece and they no longer are to report things to us, we would not be able to help them with this. So it would place a higher burden on that staff at the school.
Okay, great, thank you.
Next we have Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have a couple of questions. One is for Ashley. And Ashley, this is a follow-up to the question that was just asked. You said that COVID is no longer a reportable disease. Could you expand on when that became the case and why?
I am going to call on one of my friends. I have our state epidemiologist with us, and so I'm going to ask that she answer that question for you, if that's acceptable.
Thank you. I didn't see you here.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Farah Ahmed. Thank you for the opportunity to answer your question. I am the state epidemiologist with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. When the federal government ended the public health emergency, KDHE did make the recommendation that COVID-19 no longer be a reportable condition. It was a reportable condition under the piece of regulation where pandemics, outbreaks, newly emerging diseases are reportable to the state, and that's how we were keeping track of it. But as we went 2.5, 3 years in, it kind of doesn't meet that standard.
So currently in law, if and hopefully we don't face a pandemic again, but we know that's a great possibility. But if we did, that would, under that part of the law, there's a possibility that we would be back in the same position, but there would be the ability to have that authority to make those decisions for the good of Kansans.
Correct. If this bill does not pass, and if we maintain the authority to have rules and regulations, under those rules and regulations, any newly emerging diseases or anything like that would still be reportable to KDHE.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So this back to Ashley. So Ashley, under this proposed legislation, could a child care provider be required to take a child even if they were contagious?
No. So child care providers are their own entity. So child care has a set of required vaccinations that are published in regulation, just like school-age kids. So those are the only required vaccines that a child has to have upon entering daycare, unless they have an exemption, which you're all familiar with. They can have a medical exemption or they can have a religious exemption. In Kansas, we don't ask for anything to prove a religious exemption. If that's what is claimed, that's what is accepted. Because they are their own business, then they do have the authority to decide if they want to add additional requirements in order to take children. We have no say over that. So 2 years ago, we received phone calls from centers that said, from parents that said, I want to get my child into this daycare center. The center is saying they don't have the COVID vaccine and they won't take them, make them take them. We do not have that authority to make them take them or to make them require anything that it's not set already in regulation.
So this would not change it with any other vaccinations as well. So if I had a 3-year-old and they were in daycare and they were showing signs of measles, that daycare provider would not take them.
They would not take them. So if this bill passes, all of that's off the table. So public health is no longer involved at the local level or at the state level. If the provider doesn't know what the signs and symptoms of measles, and they don't know that the child has been diagnosed, depending on the provider, they can still continue to take them, which then, of course, it's going to continue to infect the other children. In that situation, the biggest risk are babies who are too young to be vaccinated against that virus.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I have a follow-up for.
Let's wait just a moment because we have other senators. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ashley, a quick question for you. During the time of COVID, we were getting all sorts of advice coming down from the CDC, which I remember Dr. Norman pretty much followed right down the line. And then the county officials followed that. And then the school board officials followed that. CDC, though, that is, they don't have any control over the decisions you make, correct?
Correct. CDC is a recommending body. So they bring together experts, physicians, epidemiologists, and the like, subject matter experts to come up with the best recommendations and suggestions that should be followed. Yes.
So if you follow the CDC based on their recommendations, why wouldn't local officials and counties also follow your recommendations without having to put some sort of tyrannical authority in place?
which tyrannical authority are you referring
Well,
to?
I'm speaking about the governor shutting down the state, requiring masking, distancing, requiring big box businesses being able to be open as long as they put up plexiglass, but closing down small businesses. That's the type of authority that we saw during COVID that this bill seeks to address. Why wouldn't a recommendation from you, based on the data you're having, to these county officials, why couldn't they follow the same recommendations without having to have rules and regs?
So you're asking a very complex question. So first of all, one thing to acknowledge and not forget, COVID was a novel virus. As someone referenced the Spanish flu, much like the Spanish flu, however, a different virus that we had no knowledge about, brand new. None of us in this room have ever lived through a pandemic before, so we are learning as we're going, number one. Number two, school boards have the authority to act autonomously, and we've covered this many times, that they can act autonomously. The school board has that authority to make the best decisions for the school. The same with setting vaccine requirements, the same with setting vaccine exemptions. That is not in KDHE's purview. We provide the recommendations for them to go by and for them to use as a tool in their toolbox. We do not require them to do specific things, as you're referring.
And that's my point. You're providing recommendations, and this bill just changes your power to recommending and advising rather than setting rules and regs. I don't see the big difference.
I would disagree with you. This bill takes away the authority of local public health and state health, the state health department, to work congruently with our partners to be able to stop the disease, to stop the spread of disease. If you put this bill into place, then we no longer have any reason or authority to help locals with this whatsoever, or to dispense information to anyone regarding whatever it is that's going around at the time.
I tend to disagree. I believe that the recommendation has the force and effect of giving people advice, Madam Chair. And with regard to the measles, in 2022, there are 121 cases. Last year, there were 56 cases. And in 2019, 1,274. So there's not a measles outbreak. I realize measles can be bad. But this is CDC data I'm looking at, 667 cases in 2014. So it's going up and down.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. We do have some other questions, and we're very short on time. Thank you. Senator Stephan.
Thank you. This is for Randy Bowman. Mr. Bowman stated that this bill brought nothing to the table and did nothing to improve anything, yet it clearly brings the Constitution to the table. So it's a constitutional model of public health. First off, is following the Constitution mean nothing to you?
Madam Chair, Senator, absolutely not. But what about my rights under the
Very good.
Constitution, sir?
Now, if you have no ideas on how to proceed differently, you made that statement. You asked that maybe somebody else did. So that means we've been through this pandemic, and for Ashley, the swine flu in 2009 was a World Health Organization recognized pandemic. So saying that you haven't lived through one is completely incorrect. So you're telling us that the counties learned nothing from this last pandemic and would change their responses in no way.
Thanks for letting me clarify, Senator. What I was trying to express to you is that this bill, I see no means for a comprehensive, thoughtful, involved conversation and a set of solutions everybody's agreeable to. I think everybody has a perspective, but we're going at each other for 3 years.
Your statement was that you had nothing new to add since the COVID debacle. You as a group have learned nothing new as far as public health responses are concerned.
I don't believe that's how I said that, sir.
It's an interpretation of exactly what you said.
Thank you, Senator Stephan.
Sir. Thank you.
I have a question for Jenna. It was spoken from a representative from the chamber that, and under this bill, an employer could not ask someone to leave who was ill. Is that true? Could you tell us what section that's in?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kansas is an at-will employment state, so an employer has ability to generally make requirements for employment. This bill does not address requirements for employment. The only thing addressed for employers relates to the requirement that an employer cannot essentially fire someone for following a recommendation of isolation or quarantine.
Thank you. And then one quick question for, this would be for Heather Brahm. Heather, thank you. So then you had mentioned, of course, measles are awful, but you said a child could not get the immunization yet. At what stage do they get the immunization?
I believe it's 12 months, but I am not a medical professional. Could I punt to KDHE?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, they say
Thank
that's
you.
correct.
Okay, great. And then Heather, could you come to the microphone, please? Or I'm sorry, you're here. Ashley, I'm looking right at Ashley and saying Heather. Forgive me, I call my children by the wrong names sometimes.
I do as well. I have 4 and, you know.
So do I. So which diseases, you said that you've been working to stop diseases. This does not take away the ability for any hospital, any other provider to report diseases that they see within their hospital. It's just they're not being required to do so. Have you talked to any of them as to whether they would continue to do so if they were no longer required to do that?
I may want to talk to Farah on this one. We have not specifically asked them. Reporting is work. However, when they report them, they have access to additional resources to take that off of their plate so they can continue to see their patients daily. We can do the disease outbreak on their behalf, if that answers your question. I have not asked them specifically.
All right. Thank you very much, committee. Our time is up and we are adjourned. This closes the hearing on 391, and I would direct your attention to the 53 written submissions that we have. Thank you very much for all of the conferees that attended today.